Hello and happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to this new edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube. Today I'm going to be discussing my grades for the defensive side of the football, my top 3 highest graded players, my top 3 lowest graded players, and some news and notes, I guess, within my grades this week. So I'll be going over that in just a moment, but let's start off with the breaking news of the day that needs to be discussed right out front, and that's the fact that apparently Robert Tonyan pronounces his name Robert Tonyan, like onion or funyun, as Matt Schneiderman said when he broke this very disturbing news today. And listen, I am 1A on Bobby Touchdown's, fan list and supporter of all things Robert Tonyan. I've been on the Tonyan toboggan from day one. But I'm sorry, Bobby, we cannot call you Robert Tonyan. And by the way, Matub, how in the hell have you been calling him Robert Tonyan? Apparently Matub on Twitter today, with proof and receipts, said, I've been calling him Robert Tonyan all along. Why and how? How the hell did you possibly think to call him Robert Tonyan? It is obviously, clearly, Robert Tonyan. And you can call him Bobby or Bob or Robert, Bobby Touchdowns, Robert First Downs, whatever you want to call him. But Robert Tonyan? Bobby Tonyan? It doesn't roll off the tongue. I cannot get on board with this. I don't know if Robert and I have come to a crossroads and we're just not going to be able to make it work from here on out, but I'm not sure that I can get on the Bobby Tonyan bandwagon, and certainly some disturbing news that came out on Thursday. More on this as the week goes on, and we'll see if maybe he can make up for this obviously egregious error, maybe with a couple touchdowns, and maybe we can get back on the right foot. But I've got some serious issues with Tonyan out of Tonyan, but I digress. Let me go over my grades for the day, and let's start with my top 3 graded defensive players. And there hasn't been a lot that's gone right for the defense so far this year, but I think one thing that for the most part has gone well has been the play of the cornerbacks. And huge kudos to Jerry Gray coming over from Minnesota. That seems like a very astute and smart signing by Matt LaFleur. He has been, he's lived up to expectations so far. The corners, I think, have for the most part all gotten better. I think Jair's taken that step. I think Chandon Sullivan's playing as good, if not better, than he was a season ago, which is saying something because he played really well last season. I think Kevin King, although he was out this past week, has also taken a step. I think he's looked a little bit better this year. And I think overall, the corners right now are the strength of this defensive group. My top 3 graded defensive players this week, number 1 was Jair Alexander. Once again, and it wasn't a huge grade, plus 0.4, which again isn't a monster grade. I don't think anyone was expecting anyone to have this giant grade based off of that performance on Sunday, but another solid grade for Jair Alexander. And this is where we're at with Jair Alexander now, where a plus 0.4, still the highest graded player on the team. And you're like, yeah, he had a fine game. That's what we wanted from Jair Alexander, where his good games are phenomenal and his bad games are still really good. And that's where we're at with Jair. Even going against, Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Tom Brady at quarterback and, being put in some tough situations, he still had a very good day. Missed a tackle, had one, about 20-yard completion completed against him off of a play-action fake. Tip your hat on that one. But overall, another really solid day for Jair Alexander. Number 2 on my list was Darnell Savage. And this has been a really interesting juxtaposition for Darnell Savage this season, whereas last year, Savage was my second lowest graded player on defense through the course of the season. Didn't have a brutal grade, but definitely was my second lowest graded player. Missed some tackles, made some poor angles in the open field, gave up that big touchdown to Dalvin Cook early in the season. Just plays like that showed up way too consistently last year. I was kind of banging on the drum saying, whoa, let's slow the brakes a little bit on Darnell Savage. There's some serious question marks that were on tape. He still played fine for a rookie safety. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you would have told me that his season last year is kind of what he would have graded as a rookie safety, even first-round pick, I would have said, yeah, that sounds about right. It wasn't a brutal year for him in any way, shape, or form. That was a good learning season and still being able to make some plays for Darnell Savage. But everyone else seemed to be really high on him, and I'm like, let's pump the brakes a little bit. This year, it's kind of been opposite. Everyone's like, where's Darnell Savage? Why isn't he making plays? Is he even out there? And I'm like, actually, I think Darnell Savage is having a pretty nice start to the season. He had a rough week 1. He was one of my lowest graded players in week 1. And in the last 4 games, he's graded in the positive every week, was my second highest rated player this week. He's not been asked to be put in a ton of positions where he's going to be going and making plays on the football. He did have a little bit of a, kind of a, tackle this week where he put his head down and didn't wrap up. And there's been a little bit of that still on tape, but I think he's taking much better angles to the football. He's attacking and getting to the line of scrimmage when he needs to, coming from deep when he has that ability. I think his coverage has been good. So I've seen a lot of positives and improved play out of Darnell Savage this year, and I think it's really something. Again, when he's putting 4 straight positive games back to back to back to back, I think that's a really positive sign for Savage. And remember, he's still 21, 22 years old. He's still very, very young, still learning this position in the NFL, and I think his play over the course of the last 4 weeks is definitely more positive than negative. So again, my second highest rated player this week, Darnell Savage. And then number 3, again, not a massive grade here, but Chandon Sullivan. And I just want you to think for a second, how many times in the last year, basically year, because I think it was probably around week 5 or 6 that he got in a season ago and actually started to get legitimate playing time in that game against Dallas, and then played some significant snaps for the rest of the season, and obviously is their top nickel corner this season. But I want you to think for a second, how many times do you remember Chandon Sullivan getting beat on a play? Yes, it's happened from time to time, but it is very few and far between. Usually those plays are not chunk plays down the field. They're not big explosive plays. He's a good tackler. He helps against the run. There's just very little that Chandon Sullivan does wrong on a down-by-down basis. And he's just been one of my favorite players to watch over the course of the last couple seasons. He continues to get better. I love what he brings to the table for Green Bay. So another really solid game for Chandon Sullivan. And if there was any thought that maybe last year was a fluke, I just think he's put way too much positives on tape through the first couple of years in Green Bay for it to now be called a fluke. This is a very solid player for Green Bay. And again, all 3 players this week that graded in, or as my 3 highest graded players were in the secondary. I'll give you a second to think on this. I had 1 player in the front 7, meaning defensive line, edge, and linebackers, who graded in the positive at plus 0.05, the literally least you can possibly grade in the positive. But 1 player in the front 7 who graded in the positives. I'll give you a second to think who maybe you thought it was. All right, you've had enough time. The 1 player that graded ever so remotely in the positive this week in the front 7 was Jonathan Garvin. If you said Jonathan Garvin, you win absolutely nothing. But he's quietly put some pretty nice snaps on tape over the course of the first 5 weeks of the season. Has he played a ton? No. But I've really liked what I've seen out of him, especially as a run defender. He's kind of slippery as a pass rusher at times. Didn't do really anything in this game as a pass rusher, but had a couple plays where he was able to get up on the offensive lineman, disengage, go make a play. I've been impressed in very limited snaps with Jonathan Garvin. So while the front 7 did not grade well, and if Jonathan Garvin is your highest graded player at plus 0.05, you're not in a good spot, still tip of the cap to Jonathan Garvin for being that 1 player. My 3 negative players this week, or my 3 lowest graded players this week, number 1 was Oren Burks. The Oren Burks experiment needs to end, whether it's at inside linebacker, outside linebacker. Listen, let him play special teams. He's been a good special teams player, but the outside linebacker thing never was going to work, and it's not worked. He can't hold up at the point of attack. He tried dropping back in coverage against Gronk this week. It was a nightmare. It could have been a blown assignment, but it looked like it was on him as he's chasing Gronk down the field. Again, hasn't really held up at the point of attack as a run defender. When he was at inside linebacker previously, struggled in coverage, struggled with instincts. There's just not a spot right now for him, and I would rather have Garvin or anyone else at outside linebacker right now than Oren Burks in there. That experiment has not worked, and I think it's time to go in another direction. Number 2, Preston Smith. 5 straight games graded in the negative. Pro Football Focus actually had him in their top 5 this week. I'm not sure why. He did have 1 pressure where he went through an offensive lineman and got to Brady a little bit. Very few and far between. The pressures haven't been there. He hasn't been great against the run. Dropping back into coverage, he's fine, but I just haven't seen it from Preston Smith. I haven't seen the flashes. I haven't seen the dominance. I haven't seen anything. And this was just another meh game out of Preston Smith, and they need more out of him than what they're getting. It's time probably for more Rashawn Gary, maybe more Jonathan Garvin, but something's got to give with Preston Smith. 5 back-to-back weeks of grading in the negative. And then last but not least, Josh Jackson. And this was your typical Josh Jackson game. Give Josh Jackson credit. Some really big tackles early in the game. Flash behind the line of scrimmage, makes a tackle, forces a 3 and out. Another play where there's kind of like a screen on. He gets off his block, goes and really makes a nice hit and a tackle in the open field. had another nice tackle later in the game, had a couple nice coverage plays. There was some good on tape. If I went and cut up his top, 5 to 8 plays in this game and showed you those 8 plays, you'd have been like, all right, we got something here in Josh Jackson. This guy could be a starting corner in this league. If I cut up his bottom 5 or 8 plays in this game, you'd be like, how is this guy in the league? I mean, the big pass interference down the field, the touchdown on 3rd and goal from the 8 where Pettin rushed 3 and backed up 8. Everyone else got their guys covered. Josh Jackson one-on-one in his corner in the end zone. Does seem to slip a little bit, but again, he gives up the touchdown in the back corner of the end zone on that specific play. Had another holding penalty later in the game. Had a play where he got beat completely off the line of scrimmage. Brady wasn't looking his way. Thankfully, there was kind of a safety in the vicinity anyway, but just plays like that. He doesn't have the man-to-man skills from a footwork and from a hand standpoint. He gets way too handsy, and it's more of a confidence thing. That deep ball on the pass interference penalty was a great example of that. Stride for stride, running with the corner. All he's got to do is turn around and make the play on the football. Instead, he's playing blind and, eventually takes out the receiver. It's not great football from a corner that, as a second-round pick, you expected a little bit more out of. He still looks good in zone, looks good coming up playing the football, but when he's in those man situations where he's got to turn, flip his hips, run with the receiver, and turn back to the football, that's where Josh Jackson has struggled, especially with grabbing, with getting his head turned around. Those are very important points of playing the cornerback position. Josh Jackson hasn't come close to mastering them yet. So, again, top 3, Jair, Darnell Savage, Chandon Sullivan. Bottom 3, Oren Burks, Preston Smith, and Josh Jackson. That's going to do it for me. Check me out tomorrow on an all-new edition of the Pack-A-Day podcast here on YouTube. I'll probably start breaking down Texans-Packers and then have my 3 keys to the game on Sunday. That does it for me. Make sure to check out Andrew and Kyle on today's Pack-A-Day podcast wherever you get podcasts. Make sure to check out my full grades on Packer Report. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.